It's all changing in Indianapolis. The combine is upon us. What does the process do? Why is it different this year? How can these guys get through and give us the evaluation points that we need to make selections? And then we're going to talk about the USFL. What can it do for the NFL and what's the differences? It's going to be a fun one. Welcome to Locked On NFL Draft.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of the Locked On NFL Draft Show. I'm your host, former NFL and AFL defensive back Eric Crocker. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan Tracy from Rogue Analytics. And also, on Thursdays, we got the one, the only, Rob Rang joining us. And, he always has his articles that he's writing. This week, we're going to touch on a little something different that he's been preparing for. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the NFL Combine. And we want to start by talking about just how it kind of goes for these players, for these athletes. And I think everybody just, 40-yard dash. They're going to run, they're going to test, they're going to go through all that. But there's much, much more that goes into really kind of this 3-4 day process of guys getting poked at and interviewed and all these other things. So I want to start with you, Rob. Have you ever attended the Combine? And if so, what was kind of your experience just looking at it from the outside in?
Yeah, I've gone to lots of combines in Indianapolis. Of course, I've never been as a player, so I don't have that perspective. But from the media perspective, usually I've been in Indianapolis, most of the last 20 years, Eric, and it is a fascinating process. I mean, it is a grueling process. Some of it kind of characterized as the underwear Olympics, and it is that. Because obviously all these athletes are going to be stripped down. They're going to be, wearing these, these tight shorts and these shirts that kind of show off their physique and all that. And that's by design. People think that it's just for television and all that, but it's so that the evaluators in the stands, Lucas Oil, can just kind of see who's cut, who's ripped, who's put on good weight over the last couple of months since their college seasons have wrapped up. But it's there's so much attention, gentlemen, that is placed on the 40-yard dash, the vertical jump, the bench press, and all these athletic testing. The real value of the combine has always been in the opportunity for every single NFL team to be able to get their eyes on these athletes, to have their doctors do the medical testing, to do the interviews with all of these different players. Some of the questions that come out of this are so silly. Would you characterize yourself as a cat or a dog? And, can you win a staring contest? And I'm going to mention 5 different numbers, and I need you to remember these 5 numbers. And at the end of our 15-minute interview, I want you to be able to tell me those 5 numbers. All these things are designed to test the personality, the mental aptitude of these players. Again, from a fan perspective, all anybody ever sees is the athletic testing, and those things are important. But most of the athletes are going to show exactly the same caliber of speed, quickness, explosiveness, strength that they had already shown on the field. It's the intelligence, it's the passion, it's the durability, frankly, to be able to go through this gauntlet of job interviews and all that. That to me is still what makes the draft really, with all due respect to Jim Nagy and the Senior Bowl, the draft really begins in Indianapolis during the Combine.
I tell you, I am one that tracks all the measurements year in, year out, going back a long, long time, because I think it reveals potential that maybe hasn't been realized on the field due mental processing, coaching availability down at whatever level you played at. There's a lot of variables. But the thing that I always come back to is it's not just walk up and do your best 40 or hit your short shuttle as good as you can. The thing is that you're up late and you're being interviewed and you're being poked and prodded in the medical process. And there's all these things condensed, and that puts mental stress as well. So I think the way that you prepare, and if you're able to show that you can test the way you play, I think that also says that you're able to delineate the fact that this is a job that I have to do, and all this other stuff is noise when I'm on the field. And I take that away as somebody that can produce well And that reflects positively in some of the metrics that I do. The interesting thing for me is this whole bubble discussion this last week has been because of the shift to prime time. And a lot of guys are used to getting up, eating, training in the morning, getting their body to that peak. And there are levels within hormones, within neurological transition that allow you to actually hit your peak when you're in a routine. I think that change of routine may actually be something that we notice as a detrimental effect to a lot of guys performing this particular year.
I think that's one of the more underrated aspects of this whole thing. Just a lot of guys' regiment being thrown off. And I think as fans from the outside looking in, you want to know how fast they're going to run their 40-yard dashes. But these are guys that are having some really long days leading up to the testing, and they're not getting the proper sleep that they typically get while training and preparing. And, a lot of fans, they just think that pro day times are so much better solely because, it might not be, timed the same way, or maybe it's not laser, and that's what the biggest difference is. I think the biggest difference between pro days and the combine is the time that you have. One, you have longer to prepare for your pro day. Two, the preparation in that day, you're not staying up hours or really to the wee hours in the morning the night before interviewing with 32 other teams where they're asking you all these questions. And, the fatigue starts to kick in mentally. You don't have that come pro day. Pro day, you're prepared, you're ready. It's a structured environment for you. You go in, you test, and you test well. Typically, the combine, you talked about all those things that they're doing, is jammed into one day. And I could only imagine, even from just a medical standpoint, right? Now, I didn't go to a combine, but I had several private NFL workouts. And I could tell you, I know people call it the underwear Olympics, and anyone could do it in underwear, but there's this different level of stress when it's just you and really the biggest job interview of your life, standing there while every member from a front office watches your every move, your every step. And the livelihood of you playing in this league is dependent on it, right? And just the medical aspect of it. I remember even after my workout, going and having the medical stuff done, physical. When you're like Pop Warner, you're in high school, you walk into the room, they grab your cojones and they tell you to cough. You turn your head, you cough, and then your physical's over with. The NFL is not like that. They test everything. They get x-rays. They move joints around. They're banging on knees. They're banging on ankles. They doing the EGK test. It was a 3-hour process for me to pass my physical with the New York Jets. So just so that I can get signed. So if it's 3 hours out of a day where you're trying to prepare, then you have all the meetings, and then people get you on the board, and then you're meeting with 15 different teams, and this team has you on the board, and they have a different scheme, and then that stuff weighs on you. And then finally, you get to your on-field testing. That's the last thing you do after being, super exhausted on everything previous. So, they call it the underwear Olympics, man. But and I get that, but it's tough. It's not something that I think a lot of fans think, you'll never play in shorts and a t-shirt. Like, man, the pressure that's on there at the Senior Bowl, especially how all of us will all be glued, including millions of other people. And when that guy lines up on that 40-yard dash, he's been training for it this whole time. He knows one off step can really cost him a lot of money. When they're out there and they're doing back pedal drills, or if they're running routes and maybe they stumble or whatever it is, they only have so many opportunities to kind of prove themselves on that big stage, and everyone is taking notes on every little thing that they do. I think it's a tougher process than I think most fans truly understand.
No, it certainly is. And I love that you mentioned, Eric, in that last conversation, in that last little piece there, about the fact that the athletic testing is actually the last day of what these players are going through. I mean, they're going through that exhausting, medical evaluation, as you just described. They're going through the psychological testing. They usually have a meeting with the NFLPA about their rights and their possibilities in that regard. There's just the hassle that is travel in 2022. And this whole conversation is, as Ryan mentioned before, about the whole idea of a bubble. I mean, kudos to the team, kudos to the 150 plus players reportedly who kind of fought back against that. I mean, there's a lot of us out there who are very much concerned about COVID and things like that. A bubble sounds comforting. It sounds like it's going to be safe. But these are athletes who have been training for the last month or so. If you suddenly ask them to be in a bubble, not have any access to their trainers, not have any access to the people that they trust, not have any access to quality food, and then suddenly you're putting them in this bubble and then you want them to excel. I just don't think that was a recipe for any type of success by the players. So I think that we are going to see some production that's very similar to what we've seen in the past. I think you're going to see some incredibly fast 40-yard dash times, including from some of the pass rushers. These guys are 250 plus pounds running in the 4.5s, 4.6s that are going to justify the first round talk that we've been, kind of mentioning about them. The Kayvon Thibodeaux, the Trayvon Walkers, et cetera, the David Ojabos, those kind of guys. I think you're going to absolutely be spectacular. And so I just think that this combine is going to be fascinating for so many different reasons than a normal NFL scouting combine.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about all those things. We're going to get into some players that we'll be looking forward to seeing how they test come combine time. But first, I want to talk to you a little bit about BetOnline. Football might be over, but basketball is full steam ahead for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, and to where to find the next fired coach. Where is he going to land? BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports needs. All right, BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information pertaining to the Olympics. All right, so right now, what y'all need to do, head over to the website today and use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. It's with BetOnline, where the games start. All right, guys. So now let's get into some prospects that we're really looking forward to seeing how they test, how certain things check out. From a medical standpoint, there are guys I would love to hear about. Matt Corral, how's his ankle? Drake London, those things. And we might not get those answers. But overall, and we'll circle back to me towards the end, are there certain players where you're like, you know what, I can't wait to see what these few guys do? Ryan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, man, there's an onslaught of them. And not to go back to our previous topic too much, but it's about preparation to run those tests, like you said, at the end of the week for them. And I was never there as an athlete, but I have been at the combine in the past as a trainer. And getting someone to focus, particularly on the technique that you've been working on since the season ended, is sometimes the hardest part. And for the speed guys, the ones that are expected to be fast, it's sometimes the difference between running a time that's expected or maybe even a touch better, or literally failing in the eyes of not just the public, but some of the scouts out there and a lot of teams as well. So for me,
like real quick, like a Tariq Woolen out of UTSA, right? 6'4", 205-pound corner. Some people are expecting him to run 4.2s or even low 4.3s. And let's say he runs a 4.49, which for most corners at 6'4", that would be terrific. But in the eyes of maybe some people that were expecting him to run faster, that might be like a negative mark next to his name.
Thanks, Crock. You stole one of mine already. That's great.
Sorry.
Appreciate that. All right, fine. Then I'll go on the offensive side. Two guys that stand out to me. One that we saw a little bit down in Mobile, Braylon Sanders. I was not terribly familiar with him on film until we got down there out of Mississippi. I want to see him run. I know he had an ankle down there, and I want to see confirmation. I'm big on Khalil Shakir. I want to make sure that he's got a time that is acceptable to teams. I don't care if it's, 4.55. I can live with that. I think it's going to be better than that, but I don't know if teams are going to go for it if it doesn't get into the 4.4s.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, one of the positional groups, rather than just kind of identifying individual players, and I kind of, just mentioned a moment ago with the edge rushers, because I really think that this edge rusher class, I think that this cornerback class, guys, are special. I'm going to focus in on a positional group that we have not talked about, mostly because the three teams that we also cover, the Kansas City Chiefs, the San Francisco 49ers, the Seattle Seahawks, have been pretty good at the running back position. But I think the running back position in the 2022 draft draft. I love its depth. I don't know if there's a first round caliber guy this year. So I want to see if there is a 40-yard dash time, if there is a short shuttle time, those types of measurables that are really going to prove some type of difference maker between, say, a Kenneth Walker III, between a Breece Hall, some of these other running backs that we've kind of talked about that we've been intrigued by. I think that the 40-yard dash time, honestly, when it comes to the running back position, might just be the most overrated thing. But when you are as tightly jumbled up as this group is at running back, if there is going to be somebody who's going to crack the top 32, they're probably going to have to crack the 4.5s and getting into the 4.4s even. And that's the thing, is that if you're going to be a back at 210, 220 pounds, like most of these backs that we're talking about are being bandied about as the number one back in this class, then someone's going to have to break that 4.50 marker. And so I do think that is going to be one of the very few positions that we could actually have a little bit of movement. And kind of going back to the comment you guys are both making before about, like, with Woolen, for example, how he's got to kind of, live up to expectations. What about a guy like a Chris Olave from Ohio State? I mean, we've all seen what an incredibly, productive, explosive receiver he's been. What if he runs a 4.5? Then suddenly everybody's going to be freaking out. And that's the thing, is it's actually got to match the tape. And so to me, that's where the combine can be really helpful. It also can be very much a distraction. And so that's one of the things that I would kind of caution people. I'm not going to get the chance to talk to you guys until next Wednesday. We're going to have already a lot of these results. There's going to be some numbers out there who are going to be eye-popping. I expect the Alabama offensive tackle Evan Neal to really put up some incredible numbers. Is he really worthy of number one overall? That's a whole different type of conversation. I don't care what he runs in the 40-yard dash. Can he actually be the blocker that you need to justify a top 5 selection? That's a whole different conversation.
Crock, I'm going to jump you since you stole my guy. I got 2 other ones because I'm really interested to see them. I've been spending a lot of time on the defensive side of the ball. I need to see Drake Jackson time well in the 3 cone because he's got the length. He's got enough power for me. He's had a couple of issues where I just don't know if he can put it all together. Maybe if it's a blinders on, just run this drill, maybe I can get an inkling of what his top side is, what his ceiling is.
And he's one of the guys that, I think if you were to say before this whole process started, even before the season, Drake Jackson out of USC, he's one of the top edge rushers. Now, this is, played out to be a terrific edge class. And I don't think he's in anyone's top 5, 6, or 7, but maybe with a better pro day and maybe show off some more athleticism, say, hey, there is a little bit more upside to him. Maybe he can kind of climb up some boards a little bit. Yeah.
The other guy I want to throw out before you get yours is Damien Clark from LSU. He's in the second tier linebackers for me right now, but if those long legs sometimes don't churn right away, but in a straight line, I think he's going to time pretty well. I think that might give him a bump as well.
Yeah, for me, and I know everybody expects me to, start with the receivers and defensive backs, but I'm actually going to start with a different position. The guy we've talked about a lot on this show, Boye Mafe, a guy who's probably kind of being pegged as a late day 1 guy, early day 2 guy. But I'm curious to see, not even with like his athletic testing, but what does it look like in the field, in space, in all the drills? He's a guy that potentially might have to drop into coverage as a linebacker if a team wants to utilize him as more of a 3-4 outside linebacker. All right. How does he play in space? How does he move? Does he show any stiffness or anything like that? I think as an edge rusher, he's terrific and he's going to continue to improve there. And we saw at Senior Bowl show some ability to rush from a 3-tech, but can he also play out in space? I'm going to be curious to see that come combine time. Some other things, Roger McCreary. His arm length is some of the shortest I've ever seen. It was like under 29 inches, which is crazy. I don't even think I've ever seen any arms that short, at least what I paid attention to. And teams, they're going to be teams that automatically, because of that, just cross him off the list. They won't take him at all because he's under 32 or 31 inches. So I think for him, a guy who I think can be a terrific outside cornerback, he also has some nickel ability as well. How well does he run? And I think that's going to help his draft stock. If he can run low 4.4s, that should bump him up a little bit in the sense of a guy that can maybe play both, and maybe teams can overlook that arm length. But if he runs low 4.5s, there are going to be some teams that, okay, we like him on film, but maybe he's a day 2 and even a late day 2 type guy. So I'm going to be curious to see that. Matt Corral, we didn't get a chance to see him next to the other quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl. What does he look like just throwing with those guys? As long as the ankle checks out, everything's good. He's on the field. He's performing. How does it look like when the ball's coming out of his hand as opposed to some of the other guys that might be more physically imposing? And then Drake London, he's a guy. Not even so much the 40. I don't expect him to run this blazing time. But, when you're 6'5", 210 pounds, what does your short area quickness look like? Separation is a big question mark a lot of people have with him. Can he get in and out of his breaks? Does he have a good 3-cone, a good L drill? I'll be looking for that with him. And then a couple more receivers real quick. Reggie Roberson out of SMU. He was a guy who was a blazer, averaging 21 yards per catch in 2020, I believe it was. Tore his ACL, did not enter the draft, ended up going playing another year, and only averaged 12 yards per catch. So his yards per catch went down tremendously. I'm curious to see, does he still possess that same speed he had before the ACL injury? And then George Pickens, another guy dealt with a lot of injuries, probably would have been one of the top guys if not for his limited play in his last season. A lot of high caliber receivers coming out. Does that push him down the board? But if he tests well, maybe that'll bump him up and people might start to take him a little bit more serious in this process, because right now I don't hear anybody talking about him. I think he's a guy that should test fairly well. When we come back from this break, we want to talk to y'all a little bit more about the USFL, kind of what to expect from that and how that whole thing's going. All right, guys. So, Rob, you know more about this than I haven't dove into this yet, but I know you've been peeping this. Tell us a little bit about this new league.
Yeah, so the USFL, they just had their draft here on Tuesday and Wednesday of this past week, guys, and it's an 8-team league, and what they are looking to do is, they're looking to compete with the NFL, of course, the CFL up north, and all of that. It's kind of fascinating with how they are doing things. They have to draft their entire teams, and so to try and make it as fair as possible, they did the lottery, kind of like you see in the NBA with the ping pong balls and the whole things. And Michigan wound up having the number 1 overall selection. And, rather than kind of break down who they selected and all that, I think that to me was the most fascinating thing about what they did is that they did kind of a little bit of a snake draft, but they actually kind of manipulate a little bit so that every single team would wind up having their selection of 2 different positional groups. And what I mean by that is in the first round, they recognize that the most important position on the football field is the quarterbacks. So every one of the teams had to select a quarterback in the first round. They recognize that the second most important positional group is the edge rushers. So every single team had was supposed to take an edge rusher in round 2 or number 2 and number 3, as well as the 4th round if they wanted to. They allowed teams to get a little bit more creative in that regard. Offensive tackles were next. Cornerbacks were next. It wasn't until day 2 on Wednesday, when they would finish up their 35 rounds of this draft, that they started looking at the wide receivers, the running backs, the interior offensive linemen, and things of that nature. So it was kind of fascinating how this all went down. And there were a number of players, guys, that were drafted that, came from the NFL, had some experience in the NFL. And to me, that's the conversation I think that we should be having here is, of course, this is the Locked On NFL Draft, not the Locked On USFL Draft show. And so what I'm fascinated by is that we know that there's going to be some of these players who are going to wind up having some success in the USFL. And if they do have success there, is the NFL going to want to try and lure them back? And so to me, that's going to be one of the kind of fascinating things here is who of those players is going to be able to be successful in the USFL that the NFL wants them back. And one of the guys that I really am excited about is Jordan Ta'amu, the quarterback. We saw him play at Ole Miss. He's played with a number of NFL teams, had opportunities, but I think that once he gets a little bit more coaching, then I really think that he is going to excel. So to me, he is one of the guys who I do expect to excel in the USFL and quite possibly create a lot more interest from NFL scouts as well.
Well, real quick, you talked a little bit about the draft, but the first guy taken, Shea Patterson. That's interesting. You look at the quarterbacks that were taken. You talked about all the quarterbacks went first. Shea Patterson, Jordan Ta'amu, Brian Scott, Ben Holmes, Clayton Thorson, Alex McGraw, Kyle Luletta, and Kyle Slaughter. But I think Shea Patterson and Jordan Ta'amu, those are two of the more quote unquote household names because they come out in recent years.
This reminds me of the show. It's second chance league for these guys. And I think Obi Melifonwu got in that draft, a guy that I thought had a chance, didn't quite work out. We'll talk about the team that drafted him some other day, but you got to develop as well. And so I feel this is like, honestly, once you get out of the league, it's difficult to get a chance to get back in. When you wash out, they generally wash their hands of you as well. So this is a way for guys to get something new.
Trust me, I know.
I wasn't going there. But hey, get something new on film, show them what you can do now, the guy you are today, that maybe they didn't get a chance to see when you were on their roster.
Dude, after I had got, finally let go of by the New York Jets, and I had a good year in the Arena League that got me to the league, and I had an even better year the following year. I was actually the first overall pick. They had a draft in the Arena Football League. I was the number one pick, so that's pretty cool. And I had a great season, 11 interceptions that year. I'm like, oh, I'm going back to the NFL. I was not, so it is, I thought it was hands down, I'm to the NFL. And every CFL team was trying to get me, but I had my eyes set on going back to the NFL, and I thought I put up a good enough season, but it's just not that easy. It's not that simple. The NFL, sometimes when they're done with you, they're just done with you. And I think a lot of these guys, as we've seen from the XFL as well, before that kind of folded. I know it's coming back with Dwayne Johnson doing his thing, but PJ Walker, he's back in the NFL, and it looks like he's there to kind of stay at the very least as a backup. And he's been with Carolina. There were a number of other players that went from the XFL. I think the 49ers got some guys from the AAFL. Daniel Brunskill, he was a guy that was on one of the teams. So, we do look at these leagues and think it's just a lot of guys that are just, kind of throwaways, but some of these guys will get another opportunity in the league. And I think that's what's really fun about some of these leagues. See who gets that second opportunity.
Yeah, and that's one of the articles that I just recently kind of put out for Fox Sports. Again, I had a couple of different articles. I broke down all 8 of those quarterbacks that were drafted in the first round. But my favorite article actually is one where I was just kind of trying to compare some of the USFL's players that I anticipate who are going to have some success to some of the more recognizable players in the NFL. Now, I'm not in any way going to suggest that Jordan Ta'amu is going to be Justin Herbert, but at the same time, that's actually who he kind of reminds me of in terms of his arm strength, in terms of his mobility, in terms of his experience against quality competition. Of course, Ta'amu wound up playing at Ole Miss against the SEC. Justin Herbert played with University of Oregon in the Pac-12. I think that they're both going to be young superstars in their respective leagues. Lance Lenoir, a wide receiver, was selected by the Michigan Panthers, the same ones that took Shea Patterson number 1 overall. Lance Lenoir is a savvy route runner. He's been in the NFL himself. He doesn't have that elite 40-yard dash time. He doesn't have that elite size. But at the same time, his route running, the fact that he does have those sticky hands, to me, considering that the fact that we are just having this conversation, guys, just a couple of weeks after the Los Angeles Rams and their MVP, Cooper Kupp, wound up proving that 40-yard dash times are a little bit overrated when it comes to evaluating wide receivers. I think that Lance Lenoir actually shows a lot of the same type of traits out there that helped Cooper Kupp have such great success. So to me, that's one of the kind of fun things about the USFL is you see some guys who have maybe they're missing one particular trait, but they have some things there that really scream that they could be these guys that the NFL is going to come calling back. I don't know that any of them are going to wind up having the 11 interceptions that you had, Crock, but I think that there are some players that are going to flash in the USFL and are going to wind up getting a call from the NFL at some point.
Right. I said it didn't help me. It did help me. I mean, CFL came calling. I could have went there. Stayed in the Arena League because they paid me as much as if I would have went to CFL, so that was cool. One other guy that I'm definitely interested in, Jamal Moore out of Missouri. I was really high on him as, kind of a day 2 type guy. He ended up getting drafted to the Green Bay Packers at the same time as Valdez-Scantling and St. Brown. St. Brown, Valdez-Scantling, they've turned out to be, at least worthy of staying on the roster. Jamal Moore, it sounds like he's trying to find his way in the new league.
The New Jersey Generals, and he's actually a guy, again, going back to that same article I mentioned before, the comparison of Lance Lenore to Cooper Kupp, guy in my own backyard with DK Metcalf in the Seattle Seahawks, Jamal Moore, I mean, he's 6'3", 210 pounds, actually had more touchdowns against SEC competition than Metcalf ever had at Ole Miss. Obviously Metcalf is a size speed freak. I mean, his success in the NFL speaks for itself, but Jamal Moore, I agree with you. I think that he is a guy that should be in the NFL. He, to me, would be one of those top candidates that I could see bouncing up from the USFL back to the NFL if he winds up having the success I expect him to have in New Jersey.
I hope that it turns out that way. I think that the league, the NFL, could use another league that can become a feeder. I think that the more that you get professional leagues that can stay alive, that's going to be the challenge for both these, and continue to develop talent. Let's hope that there's other guys get second chances.
Yeah, hopefully they do. I know all about that, and it's tough. Hopefully they make their way back to the NFL, and we will make our way back to the NFL draft on the next episode. Of course, we want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. From Eric Crocker, Ryan Tracy, and Rob Rang, we will see y'all next time. Peace.